My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips when I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Jim. It is really good to be back with you. I want to say thank you to Pastor Michael with the S on his chest. I love that message. And Pastor Chip for preaching the last 2 Sundays and faithfully feeding us as God's people, faithfully ministering God's word to us. And it nourished me and my family. And so it is good to be back. Last Sunday, Chip described the background of Psalm 62. And as he was doing that, he was describing the same context that set this poetry in motion, Psalm 63. And in Psalm 63, we have David's own son, Absalom, in the background, having betrayed David, leading the hunt to capture his own father, and who is the king of Israel. And so David he's king at this point. The psalm refers to himself in that way in the psalm toward the end. But he's a fugitive in his own country. And he's driven into the desert, and Chip really unpacked this well in terms of background last week. I'm assuming that you heard that, so just in terms of background. So I won't spend the time on that today, but David is literally driven into the desert. He's driven into the Judean wilderness. And in the desert, he finds the inspiration for this song. And he writes a song that compares his own soul. He writes a song that compares his own soul to a dry and weary land like the desert he's camping in right now, against his own will. He's going to say in this song, everything about my life feels dry and lifeless right now. I feel like my life right now is like this desert, this wasteland. But despite the pain of his son's betrayal and the physical exhaustion of being hunted and the fear of the unknown, despite all of that, David knows and is confident that the deepest well he could find right now in the midst of this desert is God himself. Think about that. That's what's happening in this song. The song, despite all of this that's going on in David's life, this song is about greatest thirst, deepest appetite that can only be found to be satisfied by God's presence and his steadfast love and his faithfulness. Last Sunday, Chip also showed us how Psalm 62 was moving symmetrically to the center. Do you remember that? The main point in Psalm 62 was moving toward the center. This psalm works a little bit differently. This psalm, the main point is in the first 4 verses of this psalm. And in fact, the first and third verse really get at the main point. So I want to spend most of our time this morning in this first section, verses 1 through 4. So let's think this way. Let's think about God, my desire, number one. Number two, God, my habit. And number three, God, my security. My desire, my habit, and my security, God himself. Let's think about the first point, God, my desire, with verses 1 through 4. Start in the very first line. So many of you love this psalm. You know this psalm. You've memorized this psalm. Let's just begin with the very first words of it. Oh God, you are my God. Don't move too fast through that first line. Oh God, you are my God. The longing and the desire of these verses is not the groping of a stranger, writes Derek Kidner, but the eagerness of a friend, almost of a lover, to be in touch with the one he holds dear. Oh God, you are my God. There's a simplicity and a boldness about true love, isn't there? There's a simplicity and a boldness about covenant love. And so that's what's coming out in this first line. David is not afraid to lay claim to his covenant love in God. Oh God, you are my God. I pledge my fidelity and my devotion and my whole heart to you. You are my God. There's no person. There's no idol. There's no ocean sunrise. There's no mountaintop view. There's no other thing in the world that gets my whole heart except you. You alone are my God. I will not lift up my soul to another. I will not worship anyone or anything else. I will not give my heart and all of who I am, even the parts of me that I don't understand. I will not give myself entirely to anything or anyone except you. And so earnestly, next line, I seek you. Some of you might have early, I seek you, early in the morning. This has caused the tradition of the church to see this as a morning and evening psalm, early and at the end in the night. You'll see in a few minutes. That may or may not be the best rendering. Earnestly and eager. The sense is eagerness. It's fine if you read the psalm that way, but the sense is eagerness, like that eagerness of the dawn, so you can see the connection with early. But the eagerness is really the sense of the passage. And so earnestly or eagerly, we don't use the word earnestly very often, so eagerly, earnestly, eagerly, I seek you. The idea is that with energy and purpose and diligence, I'm eager to know your presence. I'm eager to know you, Lord. I have this, I can't wait. Like, those of you who still have kids at home, you know how this is, the few days before summer vacation, right? I can't wait to go on summer vacation. That's the eagerness we're talking about. 3 or 4 days out, you really start to feel that eagerness. The night before, you start to feel that eagerness. The morning of, you're loaded down, pulling out of the driveway, and everybody is so, I can't wait to go on summer vacation. That's what David is talking about. He's talking about an eagerness, like I can't wait any longer, Lord, to meet you, to know you, to sense, because I've done this before. Verse 2, I've seen your power and glory in the tabernacle, in the sanctuary. I've known your presence in that moment of worship. I've known your presence and I've been there, and I can't wait to get back there. Do I have to wait to get back? No, I don't have to wait till I get back there. Lord, would you meet me here in the desert? Would you meet me in the desert right now so I will know your presence? A few minutes ago it was prayed. Some of us are experiencing isolation, exhaustion, just worn out from life. That's the moment when you sense that, to pray as David is praying and singing and writing here. Meet me. God, meet me in my moment of desperation. Meet me in my moment of darkness, because your steadfast love. Meet me in the desert, Lord, because verse 3, I really do believe that your steadfast love, your faithful love, your unending promise is better than life itself. That's what Christians believe. Christians believe that the love of God is better than life itself. Your steadfast love is better than the best of my circumstances. Let that hit you the next time your circumstances are good, not just bad. Like in the midst of your best circumstances, when the world's all as it should be. Let this hit you again. Your steadfast love is better than the best of all of my circumstances, and, the context of this psalm, better than the worst. Your steadfast love is better than life itself. Listen, if you want something when you're laying on your deathbed that will last, if you want something that's better than life itself, man, tap into God. Tap into who God is in Jesus Christ, and you'll be able to sing like David. Now look at the middle of verse 1, because that's sort of just the beginning of what he's doing in verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. In the middle of verse 1, David takes another step, not a little step, not a baby step. David takes a big step from where we are to this next line. Look at this. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you. One Hebrew scholar wrote, of the soul line, my soul thirsts for you. He wrote, you could translate it this way, my throat thirsts for you. That's probably a good rendering, because you don't really get thirsty in your mouth, right? When you've been working and you're tired and you're thirsty, well, you don't really feel the thirst. You do feel the thirst in your mouth, but you really feel it where? In your throat. My soul, deep down inside of who I am, my soul and my flesh. And David wants you to understand this. He's feeling this. Inside me, the deepest part of me, my flesh, my soul, body and soul, however you want to describe it, David says, man, I am thirsty for God. I need you. I can't quench this thirst. Lord, I am not just praying. I have to have you. I have to have you. Do you pray like that? God, I have to have you. I don't have to have everything else, but God, I have to have you. My soul and my flesh, they faint for you. So there's no thirst. There's no sense of fatigue. There's no real sense of thirst or fatigue like someone walking through the desert for days, right? The heat and the dryness in the desert literally pulls the life out of you. The heat and the dryness just pulls the water out of you. And with the water being pulled out of you, you're starting to dehydrate, and your vitality goes with it. I mean, this is a really strong imagery of what David is trying to say about how much he needs God. Last Sunday evening, it was climbing to 97 degrees. I don't know if it's going to hit 97 today or not. They're saying 94, 95. Thankfully, we won't hit 97. But last Sunday, we were on the way to 97. And for those several days, we just couldn't get cool. And I kept bumping the AC up. I'm like, this AC has to turn off for half an hour or something. Right? All the dads are like, yeah, I hear you. So, I mean, against protest, I keep sneaking it up, 77, 78, and we just couldn't get cool. And so I said to a couple boys, let's go to Back Creek. So we hopped on our bikes, and we went out to Back Creek, and we went out near Starkey Park to the very back corner. You know where the bridge is, the big bridge and the little bridge are right there. the Parkway and the Merriman Bridge. And so underneath back in there's a really cool spot at Back Creek, and we had never been back in there together, so we got out and walked down through the creek. We found the amazing little rock slide and water hole, and we just got in the water, and we would rotate and just sit there and just let the water rush over your whole body. And it was incredibly life-giving. Like we're sitting there, it's like you're in this amazing cool tub, not a hot tub, but a cool tub, and water's just rushing over you, and they're like, get out, it's our turn. And so I had to move, and then Chase would get in, and then Anderson would get in, and water's just lit. So for an hour, we had no idea. Vicky, they were on a bike ride. I don't know where they are, so who knows what time we got home. For like an hour, we're stuck in this amazing cool spot that's just revitalizing us. That's what water is supposed to do for you, right? It's supposed to refresh your soul. David, who's been forced to camp in the desert, says, God, you are more life-giving. Listen, you are more life-giving than the best water source I have found out here. Now, they had to have a water source. They've got a water source out there. Maybe it's a spring, a well-known spring in a cave in a particular area. But they had to have a water source out there. They're out there for days. They're being hunted. They're on the move, but they're not out there for a day. They're out there for a long time. And they've got to have a water source. David says, God, you are to me the most life-giving water source I could ever imagine. Despite all of what's going on in my heart and soul, despite the betrayal of my son, the exhaustion of being hunted, the fear of the unknown, despite all of that, I'm going to sink my well deep into God. That's where I'm going to sink my well, into God himself. It sounds like David has met Jesus in John chapter 4. You remember John chapter 4, Jesus is taking the cut through, he's taking the Samaritan cut through, he's on his way back to Galilee, he's taking the Samaritan cut through, and he ends up weary from his journey, the text says, and he stops at Jacob's well. And about that time, a lady comes to Jacob's well and is going to get some water, and she's a Samaritan, and he's standing there exhausted and thirsty, and he asks her for a drink, and she says, say what? Like, a Jewish man is speaking to a Samaritan woman? That doesn't happen. Are you sure you want me to get you a drink? You remember what Jesus said to her? If you knew who I am, if you knew me, you would ask me for a drink. And I would give you something that would last so much longer than what's going to come up out of this well. I would give you the gift of God's grace. If you knew the gift of God, he says, and who you're talking to, I would give you something that was going to satisfy you. And then as it comes out, he discovers her history and her background. And then he essentially says to her, what you've been looking for in all those men, in their male affection, you can only find in me. You can only find it in a life-giving relationship with God through me. It sounds like David is tapping the same well, doesn't it? David's tapping the same well. So if I could invite you just for a moment to do that, if you could let me in as your pastor this morning, if you could let me into your world and into your heart for just a moment, I would want to say what you have been looking for, what we have been looking for in professional success, in vocational identity, in personal wealth, in political solutions, in social acceptance, in athletic standing, even in religion. What you've been looking for that keeps coming up dry is God himself. What you've been looking for is in Christ. Because whenever you drink of those waters, you will thirst again. This song is about the discovery that God is the well. That's what this song is about. David is saying, man, this song is about how I am reminding myself that God is my well. God is the deepest, cleanest, most life-giving water source you could ever drink from, the most satisfying of all. God is at the same time my desire, my ultimate longing, and my satisfaction. Only God can be that. Before we leave this first stanza, let me show you a practical effect of David's discovery that maybe you've already seen. It's in verse 4. You might have made the connection. But look at verse 4 and see the connection between desire and what his desire for God, his discovery of God as the well, and what it has done to him personally. So I will bless you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. David's very practical discovery is that he's been moved to a place of worship. He's been moved to engage himself, body and soul, physically, into a place of praise. So he says, I will bless you with my mouth, and in your name I will lift up my hands. He either has in mind something like this: in your name I will lift up my hands toward heaven like this, or maybe something like this. In your name, I will put myself in a posture of worship, he says. This is an incredibly practical outworking of what's happening inside of David. He says, in your name, I'm going to lift up my hands. I'm going to offer praise to you as an expression of worship. I will lift up my hands. I want to encourage you to think about your posture in worship. I don't just mean here in the Sunday morning service. I just mean your personal habits of worship and your posture when you pray, when you sing, when you're practicing your devotional life. Because the more your body is engaged in what's happening inside you, heart and soul, the more likely you are to be remade into the image of Christ. Because you're body and soul. You're not just a soul. And so David's telling his mouth and his hands, we're gonna show on the outside, and we're gonna voice and we're gonna show on the outside what's happening on the inside. So he says, in the midst of this discovery, in your name I will lift up my hands. And some commentators seem to think his hands are like this with his palms open. Why? Because that would indicate a posture of vulnerability and receptivity. And well, let me kind of work this out a little bit for you. Sam Storms has written a really helpful article on lifting up our hands, and here's what he says: our hands speak loudly. When angry, we clench our fists, threatening others. When guilty, we hide our hands. We hide the evidence. When worried, we wring them. When we're afraid, we use them to cover our face or hold tightly to someone for protection. When frustrated, we throw them wildly in the air. When hospitable, we use them to warmly receive others. Doesn't it seem appropriate, therefore, to raise them to God when we seek Him in prayer or in praise? And then he goes on, here's what I'm saying. It's like surrendering yourself to a higher authority. It's my way of saying, God, I'm yours, do with me as you please. It's a posture of vulnerability. I have nothing to hide. I come to you open-handed, concealing nothing. Search me and sanctify me. I'm holding nothing back. It's a posture of expectantly receiving from another. In other words, Storms says it's Father, I am a beggar. Will you please help me? I have nothing but need to offer you right now. And I'm here to receive all that you are for me in Jesus. So glorify yourself by satisfying me. Fill my hands. See, when your hands are like this, you can't say fill them. But when your hands are like this, you can say fill them. Let me bring this all the way home to those of you who are still thinking about Christ and trusting in Jesus. Completely surrendering your life to Him. If you've never trusted in Christ by opening your heart and soul to Him, this very line could be a gospel discovery for you. This line could be the gospel moment for you. Look at this, in your name. In the name of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, in your name, I will lift up my hands. I want to receive whoever Christ is, God, and you might even pray this. Like, this is a prayer I prayed when I met Christ. Back at the University of Georgia, I prayed something like this: Lord, I'm not sure if you're real or not, but if you are, Father, would you please help me to know who Jesus is, that I might live for Him, trust Him, love Him, and give my life to Him, something like that. If you're who you say you are, I want to surrender my life to you. In your name, my hands will become an example of my life. Like, my hands are me. They're part of me. And so in your name, I lift up my hands, and I will give myself to you expectantly and hopefully. If you have never by yourself or in this context, like if you've never received Christ, I want to encourage you to either by yourself or in a worship service like this, could even do it today. And don't worry about what everybody's going to think around you. You just need to stop worrying about that. Just stand before the Lord in a few minutes when we sing and say, Jesus, I lift up my hands in your name. I surrender myself. It's a way of saying I give myself to you. Will you save me? Will you help me? Will you change me? Like, find the gospel coming alive in verse 4. I will bless you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. I will let my life be yours. I will express surrender and vulnerability and the receiving of your gift, of the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ. And then those of you who are already believers, I want to encourage you to think about, if you're uncomfortable doing it here, that's fine. Our goal is not to get you to lift up your hands in a church service. But if you've never done this privately, by yourself, in your room, on a walk, let your posture, let your physical posture, this could include bowing down to the Lord, on the ground, on the floor, bowing to Him, kneeling before Him, lifting your face and your eyes toward heaven, and include your hands. These are all sorts of different ways that your posture can begin to affect what's going on in your heart. So it's not that David is a religious fanatic. Well, I guess he kind of is. He's just not worried about what anybody else thinks. But it's not like David is fully human. So he wants his physical posture to reflect his act of worship. That's why he lifts up his hands. I want to encourage you to consider that at some point in your worship life. All right, here's the second point. I got to go to the second point. God is my desire. Number 2, God my habit. Verses 5, 6, 7, and 8 really, I think, describe habit in this way. David's talking about his habits of the night. He's talking about his evening habits. He's talking about his habits in the dark. When I remember you upon my bed, verse 6, and meditate upon you in the watches of the night. This second stanza is calling our attention to David's habits of the night. What are your habits of the night, especially when you're under stress? So this is a really practical question. What would you say if we watched your habits of the night? What would we see? If those closest to you were to describe, because they know you, what your habits of the night are, what would that look like? Especially when you're under stress. You're sleepless. Listen, you're sleepless, you're anxious, you're worried, you're tossing and turning. When the worries of this life are hunting you down like a scene from zombie apocalypse, like when the worries of your life just keep hunting you down, what do? What are your habits? What are your nighttime habits? Because the world's habits are pills, pornography, alcohol, stress eating. You know, stress eating can be a real sin struggle. Baptists like to criticize people who drink, but I bet our obesity rate is as high as anybody's. We stress eat. What are your nighttime habits? Look at David's habits of the night. In the most stress-filled season of his life, look at 4 words in this section. I remember, I meditate, I sing, and I cling. Here are David's habits in the darkness of the desert night of his soul. He says, I remember, I meditate, I sing, and I cling. I remember, I like in my mind's eye, I'm thinking about David and his remembrance. So verse 6, when I remember you upon my bed, he's tossing and turning. He's having a hard time sleeping because he's exhausted. He's being hunted. When I remember you, what's he remembering? I wonder if he goes back to the day he stood with all the other warriors. He's like, who is this guy Goliath who's going to defy the armies of Israel? Did you guys forget that God is in charge? Like, he didn't choose himself to go be a great warrior against Goliath. But he trusted in the Lord. He trusted so fully in the Lord. I wonder if in his mind, one of the things he's remembering on his bed is how God delivered him, not just from the bear and not just from the lion, but from Goliath, a monster of a man. I guess you can probably take care of Absalom in the way that you would like to, Lord. He's my own son. I don't want to kill him. He wants to kill me. David says, I'm going to habitually remember the faithfulness of God, the power of God, the steadfastness of God. I'm going to trust in that. He says, I meditate on you. Look at verse 6 again, and meditate on you. Mark that. He's not just meditating. This isn't just some sort of, act of meditation where he's emptying his mind of all things And no, he's going to meditate on something. He meditates on God himself. How do you meditate on God? How do you and I meditate on God? One of the best ways for you and I to meditate on God is to open his word, is to open the Psalms, for example, is to memorize and meditate on a psalm like Psalm 63 and discover what David discovered. I remember, I meditate, I sing. You say, I don't feel like singing at night. I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I'd rather just put on a movie and go to sleep, watching the movie. That's not helping you rest. I promise you, a screen on in front of you before you close your eyes to fall asleep is not helping you rest. The science is out there, you don't even have to believe me. David says, I'll sing. You say, I don't feel like that's fine, don't sing, but put the words in your head. Or put the instrumental on in the background. Discover some habits that are going to be life-giving to you. Here's what David has discovered. Not only has David discovered he's going to sink his well deep into God, because he alone can satisfy him, but he is going to be... Sometimes we get out of control up here. And you just, I didn't want to hack in your ears. Not only has David pressed deep into who God is as his well, his satisfying, life-giving well, but he learns to habituate into his life God's goodness, God's faithfulness. So he says, I remember, I meditate, I sing. I'm gonna let the music of God and the music of his word permeate my heart and soul habitually. Like I'm gonna let that be the story out of which I live. I'm gonna let it be the song out of which I live. And then the fourth thing is that he clings. I remember, I meditate, I sing, and I cling. Verse 8, my soul clings to you. My soul clings to you just like, verse 7, just like baby birds that would get up under the shadow of the wings of the mother. I'm going to cling to you in that way. I'm going to come close to you. I'm not going to distance myself from you right now. I'm going to press further into the shadow of your wings. In my singing, in my memory, in my meditation, as I'm going to just keep drawing closer to you. See, that's what David's doing. He's drawing closer in the midst. So when everyone else is feeling this heat and their tendency is to distance themselves from God, hey God, you let me out here in the desert. I don't need you either. That's what we would tend to do. David says, nope. Don't believe that, because that's not going to help you. Stop distancing yourself. Instead, draw near. These are habits through which we draw near. I remember, I meditate, I sing, I cling. And as I do these things, I'm training my heart to press further and further in to the only one who can bring peace and healing and hope and satisfy my dry and weary soul. Tim Keller, in his great little book on the Psalms, writes this: sleepless nights, filled with anxiety and fear, who has not had that experience? David puts his sleeplessness to a different use. He sings, he praises, he thinks about God's love and his goodness, and above all, his protection. The watches of the night refers to the changing of the guard, and David is awake through all of those watches of the night, verse 6. So he has time for his mind to wander. And instead of letting his mind wander, he clings. He clings to God. And training yourself to discover these habits will, in the end, satisfy you in God, which is what verse 5 is about. Look back at verse 5. My soul will be satisfied as with rich food, as with fat food. Habits that bring satisfaction. I think that's worth asking. What are my habits of the night?
And are they producing satisfaction in my life? Are they satisfying me? My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, something that tastes really good, satisfying. Again, David's making an appeal to himself, body and soul. He's making an appeal to Israel, body and soul. He's like, you got to work this into your life. Here's the third thing, and we'll close. God, my security. God is my greatest desire. He's my habit, and He is my security. So verses 9, 10, 11 kind of bring us back to the context. He's being pursued. He's being hunted. He's a man who's being hunted. Who's going to protect him? God is my security. Those who seek, verse 9, those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. I'm going to trust God to be my security. Those who seek to destroy me will go down into the depths of the earth. But you will not let me, you will not let your Holy One see corruption. You won't leave me in Sheol. Verse 10, they will be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for the jackals. They'll be like a leftover meal for the scavengers of the night. Coyotes, hyenas, jackals. But the king, verse 11, shall rejoice in God. But the king shall rejoice in God. If this is written during the banishment if this is written during his banishment at the hands of Absalom, which we think it is, then this royal title becomes, when he says the king here, it becomes a statement. It becomes a reassertion of his calling before God. It becomes a reminder. It becomes like God, I didn't call me to this. You called me to this. Which is why he says the king. That's why he doesn't say me. He says the king because he's trying to point out that God is at work here. This is God's deal. This is a calling that you have put on my life. This is a reassertion of my calling, my identity, and my security. This was not my idea. When you lined all of Jesse's sons up and said, hey, who's the one who should be the king? I didn't say, make me the king. Like, this is not my plan. And this is really cool. So it says, but the king shall rejoice in God. What is the job of the king? The monarch here he's supposed to demonstrate how beautiful it is to yield himself to the sovereign king of the universe. And so this is really cool. The next line says, all who swear by him shall exult. Now look at this. All who swear by who? By him. Does he mean the king or does he mean God? All who swear by the king will be exonerated, will exult, will find success. The story will end well for them. All who swear by God, right? Which is it? I think David, as an amazingly inspired poet, is intentionally ambiguous. I think what he's saying is all who swear by the king read, because the king, his own personal allegiance is to the king of the universe, God himself. So everybody who takes my cue on full surrender, listen to this. Everybody who takes my cue on full surrender to the king of the world, things will end well for him. What is true of David can be true of you. What is true of David can be true of your life. When you choose to swear your allegiance to the Messianic King, Jesus Christ, who David was pointing us to the whole time. We've talked about it before. We don't have time to really press into it today. David is constantly showing us who Christ is as king. When you swear your allegiance to Christ the King, are you listening? You'll never be happier. When you swear your allegiance to Christ the King, you'll never have more success. In the end, I mean ultimate success. Remember, he's stuck in the desert right now. You mean I too can get to go to the desert and live in a place of darkness like that? Yeah. Yeah, that might be included. It's hard to think that some of you who are sitting here today, who seem healthy and happy, might not be 6 months from now or 5 years from now. But if you swear your allegiance to the King, I promise you this, it will end well. God is my security. God is my sovereign. The king shall rejoice in God, and you also shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, and the mouths of the liars, and all the confusion of the world, and everything else that has been vying for your attention and your love and your affection will just come to what it is. Nothing. It's just empty. If you have never decided, I'm going to consciously meet God in Jesus Christ, who gave himself for me to rescue me from my sinful, hopeless plight, if you've never decided to do that, if you've never consciously trusted in Christ to be your king, if you've never sworn allegiance to Jesus Christ as king, I want to call you this morning. Those of you who are watching, I want to invite you to, in his name, lift up your hands, open your hands, receive his gospel, his grace, and his mercy, and surrender to him as king. I want to invite you to do that today. I want to pray for you. Those of you who are already believers, I want to pray that God would have us open-handed and standing, yielded to him in a profound sense of worship and surrender.